He's a writer, a musician, a painter whose name is synonymous with inventiveness and the unusual. In the last 3 decades of music, almost nothing has been untouched by the hand of Brian Eno as a producer, as a musician, as an innovator, as an artist. From Roxy Music to his solo career and production collaborations with David Bowie, U2, Talking Heads, Brian Eno, his art continues to evolve, and we're so thrilled to have him in studio with us today on the Screensavers. You're here in the town working on the Clock of the Long Now. You're going to be participating. What is the Clock of the Long Now?
Well, the Long Now Foundation is a group of people, a core of 9 of us, but now we have several other friends and colleagues as well, who are trying to encourage some kind of commitment to very long-term thinking. So we think we're trying to counterbalance a trend to increasingly short-term thinking, both in government, industry and society in general, and to try to encourage people to start to think of very distant futures.
How distant?
10,000 years.
So the clock will live for 10,000 years and,
yes.
and ring, what, every century?
Well, there are various theories about that. One of the theories which I explore on this record is for it to ring every day, actually, but with a unique peal each day.
Each time something different.
Yes.
The CD is called Bell Studies for the Clock of the Long Now, and it studies with bells and bell-like things. Have you settled yet on what you want it to sound like?
No.
It's a hard thing to say, to choose what it's going to peal 10,000 years from now.
Mm-hmm.
Does that seem significant, very significant? Is it a difficult?
Well, like the clock itself, this is really a way of getting you to think about long futures. So as soon as you say to someone, we're trying to build a clock that will last 10,000 years, they say, yeah, but there might be earthquakes, there might be revolutions, there might be dark ages. And you say, yes, there might be all those things, and now you're thinking about the future.
Right.
So the fact of actually doing something, trying to do something that addresses this problem, is exactly the kind of engagement that we would hope to make.
Do you think that short-term thinking is particularly an American problem, or is it a global issue?
No, not particularly an American problem, no.
We are very short-term focused, though, aren't we?
I think it's an increasing problem of capitalistic societies.
Yeah.
So if it is a problem here, or if it's more of a problem here, it's just because you're a bit further ahead in a process that we're pretty much all taking part in, I think.
Yeah. You were very early to use electronic instruments and to use technology in music. In fact, you came to music as a painter. Mm-hmm. Was technology helpful to you in that respect?
Absolutely central. I couldn't have been a musician without studio technology. I can only be a musician because of recording studios. I don't play any instruments well enough to fool anybody for more than a minute or so. So my making music has always been based around the possibilities of, well, it used to be tape recording, but now it's use of computers. So I've always approached music as a painter, really, of somebody who's putting this sound next to this one and making this one a bit bigger and changing the color of that one.
You're constructing the music.
Yes, I'm constructing it. It's very much studio constructed. In fact, very little of the music I've released has ever had any live existence, if you understand what I mean.
It's not performed.
It's never been performed. It's only ever been made. It's never, ever existed aside from on those records.
Some people say, well, an acoustic instrument, a real instrument, is human, and machine music is not human. You don't feel that way?
I sympathize quite a lot with that argument, and I'll tell you why people consistently keep getting good results from old instruments, which apparently seem very limited. You know, a violin has 4 strings. What can you do with 4 strings when you could have a synthesizer with thousands of different sounds? Well, what you can do with a violin is you can have a rapport with it. It's a highly evolved instrument. People have been playing them for a very long time. There's a whole body of knowledge about playing them. There's a whole body of music tailor-made for them. And there's a whole set of muscular skills and our own sensitivity to that particular instrument. So the power of traditional instruments is that they bring in train a huge amount of cultural information. So you don't ever just hear a violin, you hear the history of violins and the history of violin playing. The power of new instruments, of course, is that they're new, that they can make sounds that you've never heard before. They can make new worlds, basically.
So you didn't mind not having the baggage? It was okay for you not to have the baggage of an old instrument. The synthesizer was brand new when you started using it.
Yes, but actually I've very much worked in sort of hybrids of old instruments and new instruments. You know, I've always been using guitars, keyboards, voices.
Right. But often, looping them and sampling them.
Yes, often processing them quite a lot electronically. So I've done very few things that are absolutely pure electronic music.
Right.
I'm not against it, but I find the hybrids more interesting.
Yeah. You're blamed for the creation of ambient music in some ways. Is that okay?
That's fine. Though the word seems to now cover
a lot.
Everything that doesn't have a beat.
Right, right.
Well, actually, no, it doesn't. It covers things with beats as well now.
But you started as a songwriter, so you don't mind not having the verbal part of the music?
Actually, I didn't start as a songwriter.
Oh, I thought you did. Okay.
No, those were the first public releases I made. But I really very much came out of a particular thing that was happening in England in the 60s, which was a collision of what was going on in the visual arts and what was going on in new music. Right. And at that time, a lot of people thought that there would, in the future, be only one art form and only one kind of artist who could move quite freely between cinema, painting, poetry, happenings, music.
It's all the same.
It's all the same.
But is it?
No.
No.
But it
was a good idea at the time.
It turns out to be untrue, but like many ideas that turn out to be untrue, it produced a lot of very interesting results at the time. Ideas don't have to be true to be good, actually.
Right. Powerful, that's right. Absolutely.
They're like ladders, you know, you can throw them away once you've got there, but you need the ladder.
Maybe it's not true, but you created the Windows 95 startup sound, is that not right?
Yes.
You did?
Mm-hmm.
So Microsoft came to you and said, would you make some sounds for us?
Yes. Well, it wasn't Microsoft, it was an agency working for Microsoft.
Well, that must have been an unusual challenge for you. What did you think
It was particularly unusual because at that time I had been working mostly on pieces of music that were very, very long and very empty.
Right. Music for airports, things like that.
Yes, but even more empty than that. And I got this letter one day and it said, could you make us a piece of music that is exciting, innovative, creative, original, daring, bold, new, fresh, inspiring? There's a list of 39 adjectives, and then it said, and 3.5 seconds long.
Well, you did. I mean, it's a good startup sound.
It was really an interesting project. It was like trying to make a tiny jewel, you know.
Right. Well, it's analogous to the problem that icon designers have to put to pack something into a very small resolution. Do you feel that it was a success, the Windows startup sound?
Yes. I mean, it's my most widely disseminated piece of music.
Oh, now I don't know. Would you like that on your tombstone? Created the Windows startup sound.
I'd like the sound on my tombstone.
All right. We're going to play the sound, and then we're going to take a break. When we come back, I want to ask Brian, how he creates music these days, because it's very different from how you might imagine. Stick around. More with Brian Eno as the Screensavers continues. We're back with one of my heroes, one of the most influential musicians and producers of our time, Brian Eno. Before the break, we were talking about the Windows startup sound and how you were commissioned to do that for the first version of Windows 95. Windows or Mac did you use?
Mac. I've only ever used Mac.
Really?
Yeah.
And what does your studio look like? You use Pro Tools? What kinds of software do you use?
I don't use Pro Tools. I use Logic.
Logic, yeah.
Yeah. And
that's
my
a sequencing
studio is
program,
actually, yes, it's a sequencing program. But also it's an audio handling program.
Right.
So it handles MIDI sequencing information and audio. My studio is very small and doesn't have very many things in it. I've not in my life owned very many synthesizers.
Really?
I have few, and I know them very well.
Yeah.
So I'm sort of the opposite of the sightseer approach. I just like to have one instrument and really get to know it a bit. So I'm trying to recreate some of the rapport that I see between guitarists and their guitars, rather than just constantly getting bigger and bigger menus.
Is it possible? I mean, synthesizers and computers are so infinite in capacity. Is it possible to have, as we were talking about before the break, a kind of a cultural history of a synthesizer as a violin or a guitar does?
Well, it's starting to happen now. You might have noticed that a lot of records now deliberately incorporate early, unreliable synthesizer sounds.
Right.
And in fact, something that has happened recently in synthesizers is that they've deliberately started producing lower quality sounds to mimic the sounds of early synthesizers. And I think that's very interesting because it starts to show that the thing has its own history and life, and early versions of it have different resonances and connotations. So I think there is a real vocabulary now building up with the synthesizer.
Are you using older analog synthesizers or the newer synthesizers? Or
I use mostly what was actually the most successful synthesizer ever built, which is the DX7.
Oh, yeah. That's a
Korg? It's a Yamaha.
That's
Yamaha
right,
instrument. And I'm probably one of the few people on the planet who ever learned how to program it. I had a particularly boring 6 months in my life where I had nothing much else to do.
How do you program it?
It's a clumsy machine to program.
It's the inputs on the keyboard itself, right?
Yes. Yeah. It's not very well designed. For instance, the programming options are not arranged in any kind of sensible hierarchy. So things you want to do very often are just as difficult to do as things you never, ever want to do. So, in fact, I remember speaking to Yamaha about it, and they said, well, 80% of the instruments we get back for servicing have never been reprogrammed. People just use the factory sounds.
Yeah.
And they thought that was a user failure. You know, I said
very
it's not.
Common in the computer industry.
Yeah, it's a design failure.
Yeah.
If you haven't made it easy enough or attractive enough for people to reprogram it, you've designed it wrongly. But there has been, until recently, there has been that kind of attitude among designers about instruments that it's up to the user to somehow accommodate the designer.
Have you designed your own? Would you like to design your own?
I've been working on one, actually.
Really?
And I have built things that were... I've built a number of strange instruments, actually. I built a thing called the coloring box, which was a way of creating very complex formant structures on sounds. Because one of the things that I found interesting about synthesizers is that they don't have bodies. They're disembodied instruments. Actually, the body of a synthesizer is the loudspeaker. That's that's the first time the sound becomes physical.
There's no sounding board, no frets, no strings, no...
That's right. And one of the characteristics of real instruments is that they have a lot of constant information as a result of their physicality.
Kind of feedback to the human?
Well, for example, a guitar has dimensions, doesn't it? An acoustic guitar, it has a dimension that way, and that way. And those are constant parts of the color of the sound. Whatever note you're playing, those colors are always there. And it struck me that one of the reasons synthesizers kind of got a bit boring after a while is that from note to note they had the same color. There were no emphases or de-emphases as a result of the physical structure of the thing. So I built this thing called the coloring box, which was basically a grid of loudspeakers with plumbing tubes sitting on top, which I could change the length of. And I could switch the speakers in or out of phase, so I could either peak or reduce at certain frequencies. It looked beautiful.
It's like an electronic pipe organ almost.
Yes, exactly.
Like. Yeah. What are you doing now? Can you talk about the one you're working on now?
I'm not actually building an instrument at the moment. I've been thinking about a synthesizer for some time. In fact, I was thinking about it with Danny Hillis, who's one of the other members of the Long Now Foundation, and a very good inventor himself. And I was trying to think of in fact, what I've been directing myself towards is trying to think of a synthesizer that could self-evolve in certain ways. So, all right, I'm going to try to say this to get it into your statement. The difficulty with synthesizer design is that the more options you present, the harder it is to ever learn to program.
Right.
So designers deliberately restrict their options hugely because they know they're going to make an unprogrammable synthesizer otherwise. So my feeling was that what about having a synthesizer where you just hit a button called go and it produces 32 random sounds.
And that's your palette.
Using all of the possibilities, every known synthesis possibility. Then you listen to those and you think, I like that one. You hit that one and it evolves 32 versions of that, mutations of it. You go through them, I like this one.
Wow.
I'll say that again.
I love that.
You go through, I like this one.
I love that.
And so you can hone in on a sound area without ever knowing how it's done.
Right.
you could then have fine tuning so that you can actually physically tune it. So I've been thinking about something like that. So if anyone would like to...
I bet you there's people writing it right now.
I hope there are people out there who will say to me, Brian, I've been trying to get someone interested in this idea for years.
So I'm hearing two things. One is that limits are good. Too many possibilities. For instance, in the studies, the bell studies for the Clock of the Long Now, really one sound. I mean, it's bells.
Yeah.
You know, no violins. It's all bells. And so working within those limits is a challenge. And yet at the same time, you like serendipity. You like a little bit of chance in there as well. Is that how you work?
Like real instruments, actually. I mean, you know, every violin is different. Every piano is different. But you would have no trouble recognizing each of them immediately. Right. So yes, I like the I like interesting small changes in texture. Actually, I like detail, I suppose.
What do you think music will be like when that Clock of the Long Now rings its first century of life?
That's a very hard question because music. Well, you can talk about music two ways. One is where it fits socially within the culture, and one is how it is made, you know, what sorts of sounds it is. I think where it fits socially is changing considerably all the time. For instance, in the 60s, music was pretty much without doubt the center of the cultural conversation. It was a way people could identify with each other, and pretty much everyone knew everything that was going on. They might not have liked it all, but everybody knew what Jimi Hendrix was doing. Everybody knew what the Beatles were doing. So music produced a sort of a common language for people. I think that isn't the case any longer. I don't mind that it isn't the case.
Is it too diverse, or?
It's very diverse, and it doesn't have the same cultural power because we're so used to it.
It's everywhere.
It's everywhere. Yeah. You know, there was a time when to find a radio station that played anything you liked was a cause for celebration. You'd tell all your friends about it, you know.
Exactly, yeah.
Now I'm desperate to switch off radios as often as I can.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah. And yet there are 500 channels. There's, again, an infinite number of channels. I wish we had more time to talk. It's been a great pleasure having you on. If you want to know more, longnow.org is the website for the Clock of the Long Now. And they do offer this CD, which is a benefit for the clock. Bell Studies for the Clock of the Long Now. And, of course, Brian Eno also sells his own unreleased music on his website. It's Shopino.
It's called enoshop.
enoshop.co.uk. You know, iTunes Music Store has none of your albums on there. Why is that?
I don't know.
It's the label, not you, right?
You should complain.
I have complained bitterly. We'll have more screensavers coming up. I went there. I wanted to download because